The date is June 30th, 1983, and the national broadcaster for South Korea, named KBS, is airing a special segment titled, "I Still Haven't Found My Family." Its goal? To reunite families following the aftermath of the Korean War. What followed next was astonishing. A total of 36 families were reunited. Some smiled, some laughed, but most cried. It was an emotional yet successful segment. However, what was initially meant to be an hour-and-a-half broadcast turned into a 453-hour live segment, unintentionally becoming one of the greatest humanitarian efforts in world history. A total of over 50,000 participants aired on TV, resulting in over 10,000 families being reunited. So, how did such a TV segment become a thing? What caused it to last as long as it did? And, above all, what can be learned from this moment in history?
지금 그분에게 저 사진을 잠깐 보시라고 말씀을 해주세요.
네. 조금 앉아가지고 사진을 하는데.
말씀을 네, 얼굴 똑같으세요.
어머니.
Following the end of World War II, Korea was finally liberated after being occupied by Imperial Japan for nearly 35 years. But what was initially a success for Korea quickly turned sour. After the end of World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States would occupy the country, splitting control at the now famous 38th parallel. This was initially meant to be a temporary solution for separating power across the country, as in winter of 1945, two people from the US and UK, named James F. Burns and Ernest Bevin, would meet with Vyacheslav Molotov at the now famous Moscow Conference, dating between December 16th through the 26th. The conference had many goals, one of which was to figure out how the power should be split between countries, eventually coming to an agreement for a 5-year, 4-country-controlled Korea, these countries being the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and China. Although, following future US and Soviet distrust, as well as the start of the Cold War, agreements on splitting Korea into a 4-country-controlled territory would fall apart. So, to further attempt to ease tensions, the future of Korea was brought to question at the United Nations, mainly to try and negotiate with the Soviets. But this would ultimately fail. So, as a desperate attempt to make Korea a democracy, the UN would create the first official Korean election. But instead of keeping it at the southern part of the peninsula, the United Nations wanted it to cover the entire Korean peninsula. Although, because of the immense distrust against the Soviet Union, the UN would supervise the election. Unsurprisingly, Soviet forces refused the United Nations from having the election go above the 38th parallel. As a result, Syngman Rhee would win the election in the southern parallel, while Kim Il-sung, who had already controlled most of the northern peninsula, consolidated his position to become the leader of the now Soviet-controlled Northern Korea. Consequently, an increase of northern refugees would relocate to the southern part of the country. However, following the start of the Korean War on June 25, 1950, families that wanted to communicate with each other would be significantly more difficult to reunite, as all communication was blocked past the 38th parallel. This played a major role in the separation of families, as millions would be killed or go missing. Because of this, as well as the creation of the demilitarized zone after the Korean War, any contact with family members was near impossible. Moreover, some family members would resettle to another country, further cementing any contact with them becoming unfeasible. Fast forward 3 decades in the future, a director by the name of Park Hee-young proposed an idea of reuniting families following the 30th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. Initially meant to be a small segment, going under the name I Still Haven't Found My Family, it quickly garnered attention among locals, causing a substantial number of new applicants to appear on the segment. This was a big deal, as the amount of dispersed families that could be reunited was significantly higher than what was initially thought. Because of the increasing number of applicants, the KBS president, named Lee Won-hong, granted permission for Park Hee-young to make the segment into a 95-minute special broadcast. Due to this, the broadcast would be renamed to Finding Dispersed Families and would air on June 30th, 1983. But before starting the segment, the producers had to find a way to select people who had the highest chance of finding a family member. This was a time-consuming process and was done through a series of interviews. Those determined to have the most likelihood of reconnecting with their families would hold a sign with a number, as well as a list of information of who they are, who they remembered, etc. So, starting at 10 p.m., the special segment would go live. Initially showcasing people applying to be on the segment, it would eventually transition to TV host Yoo Chol-jung, as well as Lee Ji-yin presenting the broadcast.
지금 TV를 시청하는 많은 국민들 중에는 이 6월달이 아주 싫은 분들이 계시죠. 다른 때는 모르다가 아는 분도 계시겠습니다. 특히 6월달이 오고 그리고 6월의 마지막 6월 25일이 되면 그냥 가슴이 메워지고 그 살점이 떨어져 나는 것 같은 그런 쓰라림을 느끼는 분들이 지금 전국에 계시는데요.
네. 그 중에서도 그 6.25 전쟁이 몰고 온 상처, 아직도 아물지 않은 마음의 상처나 육신의 상처 모두 아물지 않은 분들이 오늘 자리를 또 해주셨습니다.
With the help of 2 other presenters named Hwang Inu and Son Seok-ji, they were able to start listing every sign. Additionally, to help reconnect the families, a dedicated team of women would be a part of a hotline to help those seeking a reunion. And it wasn't long before the first family was reunited. A little over an hour and a half after the segment aired, 2 sisters named Shin Young-suk and Shin Dong-suk would reunite.
292번입니다. 지금 말씀드리는 순간 그 상봉을 하는 장면이 있는데 잠시 좀 보여주시기 바랍니다. 네, 만나셨군요. 네, 대단히 아주 즐거워하시는 그런 표정입니다.
The reunion is hard to watch. They hadn't seen each other in over 30 years, and so did many others. Following the reunion of the 2 sisters, many others were reunited, some by phone, but most in person. Due to the sheer magnitude of phone calls and reunions, the special broadcast would last for over 4 hours, finally ending at 2:30 a.m., resulting in a total of 36 families being reunited, a massive success for the show. However, unbeknownst to them, this special broadcast would start a chain reaction. Following the end of the broadcast, a peaceful protest was about to take place in front of the KBS headquarters. Initially starting out small, it would turn into a massive, multi-thousand crowd protest to keep the show running, in a desperate attempt for people to find their families. KBS, upon acknowledging this, would opt to run the show for another night. And yet again, more families would be reunited. Although, while the second night of the show was running, even more protesters showed up. At this point, KBS was now starting to understand the grasp of the situation. The amount of Koreans separated following the war was more significant than they could have imagined. Moreover, with no real way to remove the protesters from their headquarters, they were forced to run the show every day for sometimes up to 4 hours per night. Obviously, this was not an easy thing to do. The amount of producers, cameramen, and other workers required to keep the influx of applicants, as well as providing the tools to run the show, was exceptionally difficult. Furthermore, it didn't help that word was spreading about the program so quickly to the point where it was common for over 60,000 applications to be called in per day. To say the KBS headquarters was overwhelmed would be an understatement, but the outcome was worth it. Because of how popular the show was getting, the amount of families being reunited per day was significant. While the exact number of families reunited each segment is unknown, it's estimated that an average of 74 were reunited every broadcast. An absurdly incredible number for families that lost contact over 30 years ago. And as more families became reunited, the more emotional the show got, such as the Hyo siblings.
대전 방송국과 제주 방송국을 동시에 연결하겠습니다. 먼저 대전 방송국 나와주세요.
네, 대전입니다. 대전에서는 지금 대전 19번 허현철 씨가 나와 계십니다.
네.
제주의 6566번 김정혜 씨 찾고 있는데요. 지금 이분 맞습니까?
네네.
여보세요?
지금 저 6566번 김정혜 씨가 나와 있는데요.
여보세요?
이 이름은 양녀로 들어간 후에 지은 이름이라고 그러네요.
두 분 확인하게 말이죠. 마이크
네.
좀 대주시죠.
저 어렸을 때 있잖아 이발소집에 맡겨놓고 갔었어요.
예, 맞아요.
날씨가 흐리고요.
예, 맞아요.
오빠, 오빠, 이제 죽어도 원한이 없어.
헤어지실 때 어떻게
오빠,
헤어지세요?
왜 나는 이게 헤어지게
저는
만드는
고아원에 갖다 놓고
네.
내 동생은 이발소에 그 양자로 보낸다고 글리 갔는데
네.
제가 어렸을 적에 몇 번이고 찾아봤는데 연락이 안 닿습니다. 연락이 안 닿아가지고 요번에 저 KBS
네.
제주에 김순진 씨라고 그 직원이
네.
특별히 배려를 해줘가지고 이렇게 만나게 됐습니다. 여러분에게
진짜
감사드립니다.
감사합니다. KBS 방송국 감사합니다.
네, 그러면은 말이죠.
감사합니다.
This is just one of many beautiful moments captured on the show. But to say every reunion went smoothly would be a lie. Because of how much time had passed since the Korean War, many families who were young at the time were struggling to recognize each other because of how much they had grown. Because of this, it was common for families to quiz each other by asking specific questions only their family members would know. But because of how much time had passed, it was easy to forget the answer to some of these questions. So, as a more efficient way to figure out if the person in front of them was their family member, they would ask questions based around people they knew at the time, such as friends or family members. To add on top of that, they would ask questions based around specific names, such as nicknames they went by. This proved to be an extremely effective way for people to know if they are talking to an authentic family member. As a result of this, it would unintentionally increase the effectiveness of the show, causing it to run up until November 14th, 1983, lasting a total of 138 days, reuniting over 10,000 families. To say the show was a success could be considered downplaying. The show created the most amount of family reunions in world history, but its impact wouldn't end here. Contrary to popular belief, this broadcast did not have family members reunite by crossing the 38th parallel. But it would play a significant role in helping a future 1985 reunion come together, becoming the first North and South family reunions that were arranged. The impact of this broadcast was incredible, and it helped strengthen ties between North and South Korea, eventually resulting in an additional 44,000 families becoming reunited since 1985. At the same time, the broadcast showcased a grim reality of war. What might last just a few years can have decades of impact for those who lived through it and future generations who did not. While war focuses mostly on politicians and soldiers, it's important to remember the innocent civilians who themselves lived through hell. For most, they lost their homes, belongings, family, and in some cases, themselves. War is hell, and it never changes.